Story of I and Other Suggestive Landscapes was part of my graduation project from Betsalel, from the Mafeig program. And for 3 years I was doing that journey between Ramallah, where I was living, Jerusalem, where I was working, and Tel Aviv, where I was studying. And that trip is not a simple journey from place A to B to C. It's highly controlled. You cannot own your time. Your body's controlled. The landscape is controlled. So it's not a journey that you just go through and you're the same person. And I wanted to work with this. I wanted to have to translate that.
What was it like for you, even as a student in Tel Aviv? Not just making this journey, but what kind of experience was that to be a Palestinian studying at an Israeli institution?
Well, I was surprised that... So, I'm originally from Jaffa. And Jaffa is one of the oldest neighborhoods in what is now Tel Aviv. And it was the first time for me to actually live that in my place of origin. And usually when I'm asked from where you are, whenever I travel, like even in Palestine, when I'm living in Ramallah, I'm asked from where you are. I say I'm from Jerusalem, but originally from Jaffa. That's the way I say it, that's the way my father say it, and that's usually, we always relate to our places of origin. So during my studies, it was the first time for me to actually live there and to experience Jaffa as Jaffa, and not just like for a trip to the sea for a couple of hours.
And not just as memory as well,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Through, the oral history telling of your family, presumably.
Exactly. And I was surprised that I was viewed as a foreigner by the Israelis, and Ramallah as a city was totally exoticized by Israelis in Tel Aviv, especially in Tel Aviv. And the leftist Israelis mostly, because they like the idea that there's something different in Ramallah that is different than the other cities, and most of the Israelis have experienced Ramallah as soldiers, but they didn't go to the city, but they hear all the time about the nightlife, how it's different than the other cities, and all those stories, but they cannot access that. It's illegal for them to be there. Yeah. So it becomes this place that they constructed all those stories around, but they can never.
Yeah.
And it's not usual for a Palestinian from Ramallah to be in Tel Aviv. So I was always asked, how is it in Ramallah? I heard it's really amazing, and people are free, and you walk normally in the streets.
Is this exoticization something you're trying to engage with in the text? Because the text feels so different from obviously the images that you're producing, and it is this because it's so intense and the language is so provocative. It feels like it creates a distance, or it wakes you up. Is it something you were playing with, or something incidental?
Well, I was working on the imagery of the video first.
Okay,
and I needed a text. I knew that this imagery needed a text, but I didn't know. I was for a long time trying to write things, reading other texts for Palestinian writers, for other writers, but trying to find the text. And then I came across Batai's text, Story of I, and then I knew that this is the text that I need for my video. So I think it was translated, that whole experience of me being in that place, and me treated as a foreigner in my place of origin. I think it was totally translated into this voyeurist way the film was made, and in the way that the text makes the viewer a voyeurist and peeking into those secret life of those two characters in the video.
Yeah, voyeurism is actually an interesting thing to think about, because you're shooting always. We remember that this is a kind of clandestine thing where you zip it up, even zip the camera into the bag. What was that experience of making the film like? Can you film easily on this journey, or is it something you were aware of?
Most of the time it was easy because I didn't want any checkpoint imagery. I didn't want any highly charged political scenes in the video because that was the way I wanted the video to be, so mundane, so normal, but still it shocks you sometimes with signs and signifiers of the nature and and how this place is totally charged. But still, me being in a bus was not. I had so much attention, like filming, and people were curious. So like, I'm filming nothing for them. Like, why is she filming this?
But did you have this voyeuristic sense? Was that something that you experienced, or something you feel is part of the film later?
It's on both levels. Like when I was filming, I felt like I was like a voyeuristic to my own life.
Yeah.
I was looking at it and seeing the perversity of it while filming it. Like it intensified because it's recorded, and later on when I was working with the sound and the text and when people were seeing this in the different locations, it was a different reception for the video as well.
And where was it shown?
Well, first it was shown in Tel Aviv at the graduation show, and then it was shown. I think I showed an early version of the film because the film totally was finished in Beirut.
So it's been a kind of ongoing process for you as well.
It took me 1.5 years to work on this film, and it just needed something to finish, and it was the sound. Because the sound somehow brings everything together. It creates the whole experience for the video, and that was the last thing that needed to be resolved. Because I worked on it as a silent film, but then the silence was not working. I needed something to bind everything together.
Yeah.
So finally I worked with the sound, and it was working.
Yeah, it's really powerful actually, because it feels like very much to me like an orchestra warming up somehow. This kind of, but it never gets there. It's never warm. It's just these kind of clashing sounds.
And the metallic and the electronic sounds intensifies this claustrophobic feel of the whole video, and the voyeuristic feel like you're doing something wrong. You need to stop. You need to stop.
Yeah.
It really creates this anxiety that I think was accompanied me throughout. Like
that's it. It brings it back
to
anxiety. Exactly. What does because you say that when you talk about the ways in which being in Tel Aviv made you sort of reflect on your own self through the eyes of others, that comes through here also or we see it in the text, in Simone's fetish over image making, her love of the image of things that resemble eyes, eggs, and I don't know what else. What was something resolved for you in doing this? Because it feels like a very personal, almost cathartic experience in hearing you talk about it. Did you find a resolution of some kind in making the work? Was that the idea?
Well, I think I resolved that period of my life by materializing that journey through this video. For me, it was a way of regaining control over that time that I was spending. It was 3 hours of my life, like going on and coming 2 ways. So it was lots of time that was just being wasted. And for me to do this film, as an artist, that's the way I wanted to resolve it, by creating something out of that, and translating my feelings, translating my thoughts and my experience through this material thing that I will show over and over. And I think the more I will look at it and the more time passes, I will reflect more on that
period of your life. Yeah. Time is such an interesting thing in Palestine and in Israel, because they run on different times, right? Because of the occupation. I mean, I've done this journey just a couple of weeks ago, and it really is these two paces. You know, the Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, whoop, you can be there in no time.
1 hour.
And then, exactly. And then as soon as you want to do that journey, geographically, of course, Jerusalem to Ramallah is no time. I mean, if there was no war there, exactly 20 minutes.
But instead, 20 minutes can take forever.
Hours. So these sort of different stretchings of temporal experience, I think, is really interesting, because what you do in the film is merge these along with space. Like you say, you can't tell where Ramallah becomes Jerusalem, becomes Tel Aviv. There are markers where the Arabic becomes Hebrew, or you see a soldier, or you see the wall, or you see the old walls of the old city. But these things are kind of become a bit mystifying for the viewer. If you watch the whole film, the buses also start to go in circles, and you get disoriented, and day turns into night, turns into day again. That playing with time and space feels really important to your experience, right? Of these things being both out of your control and yet utterly structuring your experience.
Yeah, it goes back to the notion of repetition and looping, because for me it was never a linear journey. Yeah. It was always going in circles, and the notion of time changes